Is Ukraine holding the line in Novo-Mykolivka, but is Russia continuing to push? And is Ukraine reaching outside its own borders to fill the ranks of its military? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's December 22nd, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first taking a look at the control map, we have a couple of changes. First and foremost, in the town of Novo-Mykolivka, this has been one of the areas where Ukraine has sort of chosen to mount a defense and counterattacks. In a lot of areas, Ukraine seems to be following a strategy of what's called a defense in depth, where they're allowing Russian forces to advance in order to get them to expose themselves and to inflict the maximum number of casualties at the least cost to Ukrainian forces. But in Novo-Mykolivka, Ukrainian high command seems to have decided that this is a place where they do want to see at least a more significant delaying action against Russian forces. And as you can see in the last 24 hours, right, well, as we pointed out, Russian forces taking this key cluster of buildings that I think is tactically significant because it will provide the troops, the Russian troops that would advance through block by block through Novo-Mykolivka, a support by fire position. So you can see yesterday Russian forces pushed, Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces out of these set of buildings. And now in the last 24 hours, we've seen an interesting pivot, right? Ukrainian forces driving the Russians out of this next cluster of buildings, but Russian forces in turn advancing up from the south through these two windbreaks and along this small creek. The result, of course, is that this key support by fire position that is so valuable to Russian forces is now occupied by Ukraine, or at least listed as contested, meaning that Russia cannot begin its assault on the town of Novo-Mykolivka until they've taken this position. So it seems like Ukraine has clearly set their priorities of holding this support by fire position, and likely this is part of a larger goal by Ukraine to prevent the Russian forces from hopscotching from town to town, using them as stepping stones moving through this vulnerable region, right? This would be a opportunity for Russia to actually make some substantive gains in and around this, where the Zaporizhzhia Oblast in the south meets the Donbas region here. So I think that's why Ukraine has chosen this as a point where it will be conducting a meaningful defense. Now, in areas where Ukraine appears to be letting the Russians, again, expose themselves and make their offensive actions, you can see here, this is north of Avdiivka, near this town of Karamik. You could see Russian forces making a very marginal advance, literally the second half of this windbreak, they're seizing it. But you can see why this is not seen as a big priority, because this isn't really on the road to anywhere. They may eventually, Russia may get to this point where they're threatening Karamik, but you can see that they are, as it stands, something like, almost 3 kilometers from the town. So, and note the terrain map here. It looks like this town, Karamik, actually would involve Russian forces assaulting directly up a hill. So to Ukrainian forces, they probably say, okay, if we can inflict a lot of Russian casualties by making them take this relatively meaningless windbreak, then let's let them do so, right? Never interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. You see a similar tactic playing out in Klitschivka and Bodanivka, right? This is near Bakhmut. And as you can see here, first off, in Klitschivka, while Russian forces have not necessarily achieved their objectives, you can see them launching a series of attacks in and around this windbreak outside the town of Klitschivka, which I find interesting because, as we talked about, for Russia to have established a robust support by fire position, one that will enable them to actually take Klitschivka, I feel like they want to continue to advance and take at least this hilltop and even more of this terrain here in Klitschivka's northwest. They haven't yet done so, and yet they appear to be pushing into the town here, which I find to be a very Russian decision, right? Kind of rushing through what should be a highly systematic effort to try to take this town of Klitschivka. And bear in mind, guys, that Klitschivka is symbolically valuable. It's valuable because it's a town, but it's been completely obliterated. It was obliterated when Ukraine took it 2 or 3 months ago, and it's even more obliterated now. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into the state of this town. You also, of course, have something similar playing out near the town of Bodanivka. This is, again, northwest of Bakhmut. And you can see that, again, Ukrainian forces allowing the Russians to advance, a couple meters through these windbreaks, but really just to advance, it looks like cross this open field and maybe get to this windbreak here. But you can see this isn't on the road to anywhere in particular. And the territory that's actually changed hands in this instance is of incredibly low value. It's a lot of open space, which, believe me, you don't want to cross an open field in this conflict in the face of a Ukrainian entrenched position. It's just a bad, bad day for you. Similarly, of course, these two forested windbreaks, same story. Again, you can see here along this town of Bodanivka, there's a large hillside in the northwest corner of the town. This is probably where Ukrainian forces are really digging in and where you'd really see them robustly defend the town, because that's where Russia's going to have the hardest time breaking Ukrainian lines. So in the meantime, of course, it seems like Ukrainian high command happy to let the Russians make a mistake and inflict casualties. Looking over at the combat map, you can see Russian forces maintaining this very steady 80 to 90 engagements across the front line, almost none taking place in the south, and almost in all of them taking place between Marinka, Avdiivka, and Bakhmut, with just a small smattering in the north and a very small smattering, one actually, in the Kherson region, which is very typical of this current Russian offensive. It's almost predictable. Now, guys, if you are thinking about getting your strike gum, and I understand that you guys are absolutely loving it. We've had so many orders already, but it's Christmas time, and so we're doing free shipping from now until January 5th. Free shipping on any U.S. domestic orders over $70, and free shipping if you order over $100 internationally. Anywhere in the world, we'll ship it to you for free. Of course, the reason is because once you try it, you're going to love it, right? And so I know some of you guys who've tried it are just waiting for these sales to reorder, which is great. Do it. This is the time. Reason, of course, is obvious. If you love energy drinks, as I used to, you know that these things are loaded with sugar. They're like $4 a pop. And for all of it, you get 100 and maybe 100 milligrams of caffeine, right? Strike gum, 0 sugar, 90 milligrams of caffeine in each individual piece, plus 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, and it's veteran owned. And 50% of the profits from this first production run are going to be donated to charities that support Ukrainian civilians who've been injured or displaced by the conflict. So it's a no-brainer, right? Why don't give your money to an energy drink company, right? It's terrible, right? Just get Strike Gum. You get 5 times the caffeine, and you can just keep it in your dashboard. Don't have to go to a gas station. Anyway, check us out, strikegum.com. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the other big story to me, which is that Ukraine looks like it's going to be trying to get its male citizens who are living abroad to join the military. Now, since the war has begun, it's believed that around almost 750,000 Ukrainian men left the country for the EU alone since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Now, that doesn't even include citizens who live outside the EU or Ukrainians who have been residents abroad since February of 2021. Now, Ukraine is, of course, worried about its future aid, but it also has manpower issues. It's unable to get the citizens it needs to counter the Russian assaults. Russia, by most accounts, outnumbers Ukrainian troops in the field by around 2 to 1, depending on the stats you're looking at. Zelensky claims there's about 500,000 Ukrainian troops. He seems to use the word at the front, but I think 500,000, just based on sort of the stuff I've read, 500,000 is more like all the Ukrainian troops who are in combat in the Ukrainian military serving in Ukraine, right? So this probably includes mechanics. This probably includes cooks. This includes tank drivers and infantry. Right. The issue is, of course, that because of the lack of manpower, Ukraine also doesn't have a great rotation system. Conscripts and volunteers are obligated to serve until the end of the war, indefinite contract, and are allowed only 10 days leave a year, which is an absolutely grueling combat schedule now that we are approaching this. Really, we're getting into the third year of the war. In February, will be 2 years into this conflict. Right. Russia, of course, claims that it has about 600,000 troops taking part in the special military operation, but the actual number is believed to be much higher. Right. Ukraine has an incentive to kind of pump up the numbers of its combat troops. Russia, in turn, wants to actually try to diminish the real number of troops. Because remember, there's a lot of employees of private companies that are fighting in this war. To me, the interesting story is, again, Ukraine, it's not clear that they have the structure, the mechanisms to really get these individuals who have who fled the country. It's not clear they have a real tool to get them back, right? They can't charge them with crimes and get them extradited. The system simply can't handle 250,000 people like that. And it's not clear the commanders would want people who are that coerced to join the military, right? You want fighters who at least want to be there, but you also need fighters who literally can just do the jobs, right? And while right now they are simply asking this recruitment drive, they're asking Ukrainians who fled, who said it's not a punishment but an honor to fight for your country. And he said, the spokesman for Ukraine said, quote, "We are still discussing what would happen if they don't come voluntarily." So this is just an ask, and I'm just going to give you guys my take here. The one thing that I will say is that I don't love people who are like, this generation's weak, they're snowflakes. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think sometimes, and that's something that people have said since time immemorial, that this generation's lazy, my generation works hard. But it's tough to argue that when the chips were down and your country is under threat, the Zoomers dipped, guys. And I don't know how to tell you this, but in World War I or World War II or Korea or Vietnam, 18 to 30-year-olds, you guys are the ones who need to go to bat for your country, right? And again, I have many qualms with Robert Heinlein and his thing, but if you're going to vote for a country, like serving it, and I'm not saying you have to, I'm not saying you have to get into a gunfight with Russians, right? I believe that, you serve your country, you can serve your country in a variety of ways, but the notion that you give something to your country and in return, you should expect your country to give you something back, I think that is a core part of the social contract, and it helps tie you in a personal way to what it means to be a citizen of your country. And I can say this because, when my country was at war, I signed up. I joined a military at war. I deployed. I fought. I came home. I left, right? And it changes the way you view your government, right? When I see the government give oodles and boatloads of money to corporations like their COVID fraud, right? I view it as like a personal affront because, again, the country's the government and the country's obligations are to its people, and not individuals with extremely high net worths already. So anyway, the point I say this because the average Ukrainian troop in the field right now is like 48 years old, which is preposterous, which is absolutely ridiculous. No, there's never, I would wonder if this is not the oldest military that's ever been fielded. To talk about an average trooper being that old, when you have all of these, 18 to 35-year-olds who fled their country in the face of a war. So, but I understand too, like I signed up with a contract with a defined end. And I would much rather, if they said, hey, when you enlist, it's indefinite. It's until you go home in a coffin. I don't know how I would feel about joining up. So again, Ukraine may have shot itself in the foot with these contracts where they may simply be better off saying, listen, you went abroad. Here's the thing. We need you. You don't have to serve in combat. You can sign up as a cook. You can sign up as a cyber war guy. You can sign up as a guy who drives a truck full of ammunition to and from an ammo point. You can man an air defense system outside Kiev. You can do all these things. We'll give you a chance to select your job, and we'll give you a defined end to your contract. You serve 24 months, or you make the roles different. You say, listen, if you want to be frontline infantry, 12 months and you're out. Or you say, or you sign up as an air defense guy, but it's a 36-month contract, right? Give people an out so that they believe that they're not going to, no one's going to sign up for a contract where you don't go home unless you're in a body bag. Like, that's dumb. So Ukraine's got to get it together. But also, I think I'm going to say men, because it's almost exclusively men. The men of Ukraine, you got to get over that Zoomer TikTok nonsense that tells you that the only person you need to look out for is you, right? But again, like you said, government and its people, you guys got to help each other out a little bit better. Anyway, that's my take. Thanks so much to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Thanks so much to our Lieutenant tier members and all the members. Hit like and subscribe on this video. Tell the YouTube algorithm that I make good content. They keep demonetizing me for increasingly benign stuff, and I'd appreciate it if you gave me some love. Thanks a lot. See you in the next one. Cheers.